co-host, if you can do that as well.
I've done the recording on my computer, so I will send the file over after this session to the IACS board. So why we are doing this International Sports Press Survey, we think that sport is still one of the most important topics in world's media, and there are very few comparative research studies from sports, in particular in print media, from all over the world. So international data of the quality and quantity of sports and print media is still quite rare, especially if you take a look on like the gender of the sport writers. So we do know something of the coverage of women's sports, but not a lot on the sports writers itself. So our research question for this International Sports Press Survey is print media coverage worldwide characterized by the same patterns across different national contexts? And research question 2, what about the globalization of sports world in contrast to national regional focus of print media reporting? So please keep in mind the background. We do face a worldwide decrease of the relevance of print media. So we see a decline of circulations. We see a strong competition to television and online coverage or to social networks all over the world. So, but please keep in mind that the situation is worldwide very different. So here if you can turn off the mic, Victoria, please. Thanks. And here in Europe, we see the situation is slightly different. In Europe, the newspaper are still the agenda setter and very important media in many countries, but the situation is different from other parts of the world, like in China, like in Australia, or in Africa and South America. So please keep in mind that we see results from very different parts of the world with different media contexts and different sports contexts, so different types of media sports. In this sports press survey, the background is the quality of journalism and most of all the criteria of diversity. So diversity is seen by the level of content. So diversity is seen by sports writing, gender, by the content, by different types of sports, or by the use of photography or something else. So diversity is something what we call the most background for the quality of journalism. And as I told you, Christof, the ISPS is not the first one, 2021. Just a very few words. The survey started in 20 years ago and with a very small Scandinavian press survey, just with 9 newspapers from Scandinavia. In 2005, Jörg-Uwe and myself are joining this survey, and together with Play the Game, a Scandinavian research engine and conference, we started the International Sports Press Survey with 37 newspapers and more than 10,000 articles. And 10 years ago, we did the last one, International Sports Press Survey, really big, with close to 20,000 articles in more than 80 newspapers with more than 30 participants this time. Last year, we thought, okay, maybe 10 years later, it's a good time to repeat the International Sports Press Survey, even, and please keep in mind, even if we face an international pandemic, a corona pandemic. So please keep in mind, if we see the results, all these results are based from 2021, and this is the situation with the background of a worldwide pandemic. With these words, I want to keep over to Christof Seeger, who is telling us something on the methodology of the International Sports Press Survey.
Thank you, Thomas, and also from Stuttgart, very warm welcome to everybody. It's good to have you all here, and before Jörg-Uwe will show you the empirical results of the ISPS 2021, I would like to tell you something about the methodology and give you a short overview what we designed. And at this point, thank you very, very much for all these colleagues from all over the world sticking with us in this survey this year or last year. As you can see, we collected 6,720 articles from 8 countries and over 30 newspapers. So we try to represent all continent, and we conducted a content analysis between April and July. And now Jörg-Uwe later will present all the results from Europe. Europe will be presented by France, Greece, and Germany. And we used a codebook with 18 variables. For those who are in statistics and reliability, I just want to tell you that we did a national, also an international intercoder reliability test with Holsti. So we could prove that these results are reliable concerning to Holsti with values from 0.7 to 1.0. Here are the quantitative results of the coded articles in Europe. And as you can see, we had slightly more articles from the German, Greece, and France newspapers with 3,234 articles compared to 10 years ago. And as you can see, the German articles have been the most, followed by Greece and France. And what we did to present or calculate the results, just that you know, we did a data correction with weighting factors so that we equalized all these different numbers. So what you will see later on, these are the results calculated with the weighted numbers. And also, every time you see a significance, we use the chi-square test with a level of p 0.05. So just that you have in mind that we try to do this on a statistical background. And now I'm happy to hand over to Jörg-Uwe to present you the empirical results. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Hello, also from me. It's a pleasure to present the data of the International Press Survey for 2021. I hurry up a bit because we have a lot of data, and we will see a few countries presenting. First, I want to show you on this slide the quantity of the articles, and we see that the presentation of the sport articles are more in the sport section than 10 years before, and the articles become significant bigger than 10 years before. They are mostly in the media-sized group. Next slide shows the visualization, the degree of visualization. As you can see, less than 30% of the articles in 2021 are without photos. So we can see a significant increase of the photos in our sample from last year. Next slide, please. After that, we look at the journalistic format, and we see here also remarkable change. We have significant more articles in the report and feature section, and less in the news section. Look at the author of the article. We see very big differences between the 3 countries in Europe, Greece, France, and Germany. In Greece, we have over 50% articles with no author can be coded. And this is an increase from the sample in 10 years before. Next slide, the gender of the authors. We have still a major gap between men and female sport journalists. We only found 5% of the articles written by a female journalist. The number of sources in the article, we have again big differences between the three countries. More than 2/3 of the data coming from Greece are without source. We have a lack of quality in this country. Type of sport, Christof is running through the slides, it's okay. We have very similar to the data in 2011. We have most of the articles, more than the half of the articles are about football, or let's say soccer. But you have to keep in mind that we have an effect about the UEFA Euro in the summer of 2011. And also keep in mind, as Thomas told us in his introduction, that the whole scenario is into the pandemic situation. Okay, next slide. The content of the articles, we see, especially in France, the focus on the reporting is on the results and the previews. Different to that in Greece and Germany, we can find additional stories related to the sport topic. The content, the additional stories, also different to the sport disciplines. The top. Okay, now we are at the gender issue. We can see that still male journalists write about male sport, we see this similar results than 10 years before. Okay, and to cover this topic as a whole, women write about other things than men. The articles from female journalists are more local, are more dealing with the topic of youth sports and health related, as you see on the slide. So to sum up our summary and our conclusion, we have a slightly increase of the quality of sport coverage in the print media in Europe over the last 10 years. We have longer formats, we have more articles written by named journalists, but we have still a focus on soccer. And we have still the phenomenon that men write about men's sport. Okay, thank you, and I apologize for the quick and dirty presentation, because there are other colleagues they want to present. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Jörg-Uwe and Christof. And now we come to the second part of these national results. Luleiya Huang from Beijing Sport University. I hope you can share your results. Thank you very much. And you got your 10 minutes to present. Thanks, Luleiya.
Okay, thanks very much. And it's my pleasure to have the opportunity here to have my presentation. And I'm from Beijing Sport University. And my team here are three authors. And Professor B is our team leader, and Dr. Bin Xiao is my colleague in School of Journalism and Communication. And before showing the result of China, I will firstly give some background information about the landscape of sports media in China. And please see these slides. There are a lot of ways of sports media and for fans to get news and information. And firstly, there are general newspapers with the sports section and articles. they are maybe the traditional way of getting sports news. And then in China, there are 10 newspapers only focused on sports. And one of them is focused on football, and one is focused on basketball. The two are very popular in China. And besides print newspapers, some of them are now turned to internet forms. And in fact, the print or online version of newspapers are part of the landscape. There are also apps, websites, official accounts in social media platforms, and so on. And this may be the same all over the world. So in brief, there are lots of types in sports media, and that's maybe a very, I think it's maybe a bigger sports media world. And then I'll show the samples of my research results. And as you can see, the chart shows the number of the articles by 3 types. And in fact, 107 articles are not very high numbers. And considering the landscape of sports media, that's maybe understandable. And because of this, my results, after all, only include descriptive statistics and not the intervention statistics. And the amount of the simple articles is also related to the limited pages of sports newspapers. And usually in China, the newspapers have 20 pages in one paper, and with the sports only taking up 1 or 2 of them. However, besides that, we can still see something from it. And then I will have 3 parts of the results. The first part of the result is about the basic presented ways of articles. And the slides shows the statistics of presentation of the sports. And almost all articles are presented in the sports section with leading or medium-sized articles. And no articles were coded as small notes or other formats. And then we go to the number of the photos. Photos appears in more than 2/3 articles, and 7.5% articles even contains 3 photos. And considering the limited pages of newspaper for sports, the statistics implies the importance of the pictures, I think. So, and then we can go through the forms of presentation. More than 4 out of 5 articles are more than 4 out of 5 articles are in the forms of a report. And news now rarely appears in the newspapers. I mean the short news, and which is constant with the development of media. Most of the functions of short news has completed by the internet. So newspapers try to give something much more deeper. And then about the type of sports. And as we can see from the slide, the first ranking sports, of course, is football, and followed by basketball. The 2 sports I've said is very popular in China. And please note the 5th place of sports, that is table tennis, which is called the national ball in China. Maybe you have heard. Of course, this is maybe different in different countries. And one thing I want to add is that in the category of other sports, it contains some sports which has historical tradition in China. Namely, one of them is Weiqi. Another name is the name of Go. And so we have a lot of traditional things in China too. Another one is about the major international events in focus. As we can see, the European Champion was a top event by number of the articles, and followed by the Olympic Games. I mean the Tokyo Summer Olympic Games and the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games. They are also very frequent. The other category accounts for more than half of the articles, with I think it's a fair amount of articles about Olympic qualifiers. To some extent, they are also can be considered as Olympic related. And the next thing is about the graphic orange of the content. And the figure shows that it's almost evenly split between international and the domestic. It just shows some balance, I think, to some extent. And the third part, that's the result of the second part, is about the international and the global sports. The third part of the result we are interested in is about the actors. especially for the athlete and the teams. And this slide shows the primary actor in focus. And individual athletes and the teams are surely the top two actors. Considering the type of sports event, I can give some more information about the teams. They are mainly include about football clubs as well as national teams, especially for the table tennis national teams. Then we go through the gender of the athlete. As we can see from here, of course, it's a men's sports world, maybe as usual. And 4 out of 5 of the articles are focusing on the men's athlete or teams. So now I have showed most part of the result, and we can give a small conclusion. And the amount of the articles on sports in print newspaper is relatively low in China. And please considering that within the whole landscape of sports media in China. And then goes through the basic presented width of articles in print newspaper. And it has some features. Most of the articles are medium-sized articles, and now rarely appears short news are now rarely appears in newspapers, and the functions of short news has already been replaced by the internet. And the pictures shows its importance, and it indicates visualization trends also in print media. And global and sports and the local sports are the second part. As we can see, soccer is the first sport in China, and sports like table tennis and other historical traditional sports occupy high positions. And with the host of the 2022 Olympic Games, the Olympics are now in focus. And from all of the above, we can see that there may be show some balance of global and the local sports in China as well as media world. And the last one is about the athletes and the teams. They are definitely at the heart of the sports world, but however, it may be the men's sports world. At least I want to add one more thing, also not appear in the samples. Some new sports like esports gradually shows its importance in China, especially for some big events. So that's all of my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lulaya, and I'm really proud that you keep awake at this very late time in Beijing. And I hope you will have a wonderful Paralympic game, which start yesterday. So we all saw these on television. So we move over to a very, very big step all over the world to South Africa. My colleague Tendai Chari from Venda University, he's in my time zone, and he will now present the results from Africa, exactly from South Africa. So Tendai, please, you have the word.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Greetings to you all colleagues from South Africa. I'm going to present the results from South Africa, and that is also on behalf of my colleague Benjamin Beagle. I hope you are able to see my slides. Thomas, can you confirm that you can see my slides?
Yes, we can see it. You can do
it. Yes, perfect.
Is it? Okay, thank you very much. So in the analysis for South Africa, the total number of articles is 939. So the number of articles increased, from the 2011 survey, where we had 418 articles. So 2021, we had 521 articles. That's an increase. In terms of the presentation of articles, we find that 99.8% of the articles were in the sports section, compared to 0.0% of the articles on the front page in 2011. 9.6% were coded as the leading articles in 2011, compared to the 9.6, which were coded as leading article on the front page. In 2021, we also find that the number of stories without photographs declined by 24%. That is from 46% to 21%. The number of stories with at least one photograph increased by 30% from 47% to 77%. And the percentage of stories with 3 photographs is quite negligible, albeit a decrease of 0.3. So what we see is that the use of photographs has increased, an indication of increased visualization of sports in the print media in South Africa. With regards to the journalistic format, the results show that the number of items classified as news decreased from 38% to 0%, while those categorized as reports, feature stories, increased from 53% to 92%. And specific commentaries also decreased from 0.8% to 7%. These results indicate a significant change in the format of presentation of sports in the print media in South Africa. So we see that sports reporting in South Africa is gravitating towards the news report or feature format. Other formats such as the interview or specific commentaries are quite negligible, which means they are not quite common in the South African context. Author of articles. The number of stories authored by a named journalist increased at least by 20%, and the percentage of stories originating from news agencies declined by 33%. The percentage of stories authored by an unnamed journalist increased from 6% to 4%. We could also say that the tendency to attribute stories, so these results actually show that there's a tendency to attribute specific, stories to specific authors or journalists, which indicates that the print media in South Africa positions journalists as experts or authorities on matters of sport, since sport is a specialized bit. Also linked to the quest for credibility in sports news reports, sports writers tend to be viewed as people with specialized knowledge. With regards to the gender of authors, the results indicate that the percentage of stories authored by male journalists increased by 4%, while the percentage of stories authored by female journalists decreased from 6% to actually 1%. Sports reporting is becoming more and not less masculine in the South African context, particularly in the print media. And this might be an indication of lack of gender transformation in the South African social sphere. The type of sport, we realized that coverage of football increased by 14% from the 2011 survey. Rugby league also increased by 9%, and other sports which recorded an increase in reportage include track and field and boxing. So coverage of sport in the South African print media appears to mirror the racial socio-economic cleavages that characterize South Africa at the moment, with football being the most popular sport, followed by the Black majority, while rugby is mainly followed by the white population. Then the number of sources in an article. We realized that the number of sources in articles has been increasing. So every article had at least one source, since 2011, and the number of articles with one sources declined. Although the number of sources with one article with one source declined by 1%, which means that very few sources, very few stories are now, using one source. Number of articles with 2 sources increased by 3%. Number of articles, 3 sources also increased. So generally what we see is that there was a general increase in the number of news sources. There's a tendency towards multiple sourcing in sports reporting. And this might signal that the print media tends to help readers see sports issues from multiple perspectives, thereby probably, avoiding bias. Top 10 articles in the top 10 content of the articles, there was a decrease in the content on the results and the reports, as well as previews. But also an increase in content in terms of other coverage related to the performance of sporting activities. Health-related aspects of sports, sports politics, and sports financing, sector also recorded an increase in coverage. Gender issues. Results indicate that male journalists mainly report on male sports. There is no significant effect on the hypothesis. Female journalists report on male and male sports than on female sports. The results show that sports reporting is a masculine and hegemonic. Even female journalists report more on males or male teams than female teams, which is reflective of the patriarchal nature of the South African society, and also might help or might actually be an indication of the slow transformation in the South African society. However, we also know that women report or write about other things. So female journalists are more likely to report on the results and reports, previews, sports politics, health-related aspects of politics, children and youth sports, as well as other content more than their male counterparts. Male journalists are likely to report on the performance of sporting aspects in finance, doping, anti-doping, and other, and their female counterparts. Women dominate in reporting about other things. Women also dominate in softer issues such as health-related aspects of sports, children and youth sports. The dominance of women in reporting sports politics is, however, an interesting or intriguing aspect of these results, and would need, a separate, investigation. I now come to the summary and conclusions of our, findings. With regards to the quality of sports reporting in the South African media, South African print media, we could conclude that the quality of reporting is improving, and this is based on the evidence that we've seen in terms of the increase of the number of reports or feature stories, which indicates that stories provide greater detail and or information than before. There is also evidence or increase in visualization of sports stories. That is to say, number of stories with photos are increasing. There's also an increase in the number of stories authored by named journalists. And journalistic attribution means journalists are viewed as experts or authorities, and this enhances credibility. There's also an increase in the number of stories with more than one source. Every story, as noted above, has at least one source. So there's a tendency towards multiple sourcing of, in stories on sports. News sources are increasing, being diversified. Then gender issues, men dominate sports reporting. Sports remains a masculine beat, and reporting mainly focuses on male teams in terms of content, probably signifying the hegemonic nature of sports reporting. However, females also report on other things as well as softer aspects of sports. And finally, sports reporting reflects the social dynamics in South Africa. That is the dominance of football, which has been noted above in coverage, is followed by rugby, reflects the social cleavages or divisions in the South African society, and the racialization of sport. Coverage also mirrors it also mirrors divisions of the past. I thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tendai. In the PowerPoint, your small man is dancing, so the South African dancing. Let's do a next very big step from the summer in South Africa with more than 30 degrees Celsius to Brazil, South America. Matheus Mello will give us some overview on the results of Brazil of the International Sports Press Survey.
Are you guys hearing me?
Yes, but we can't see you. Your presentation.
Now probably you're going to see me.
Yes.
Thomas, I'm using two different devices. Can you allow me to present in the other one? Not this one. What I'm talking and you guys are seeing me. The other one. I have two different devices here in the section.
Yes, I see.
Or if you want, you can share my presentation by you. I've sent you.
Your other device is co-host now too.
Okay.
Matheus, you're very digital.
we try. I want to allow. Okay, let me try again. Sorry, because I have to do it with two different. Okay. Window. Here. Are you guys seeing me and listening to me and
yes,
also seeing my presentation, right?
Yes, if you can move this a little bigger, the presentation, but we see it.
Okay. Now it's better?
No, but it's okay. Just keep on going, Matheus.
Okay. Thank you so much, and sorry for the technological problems. I'm going to present the Brazilian results of the ISPS, this edition of the ISPS. My name is Matheus Simões Mello. Matheus is the Portuguese version for Matthew, and I am professor of the Department of Journalism of the Lutheran Institute of Santa Catarina, which is situated in the southern part of Brazil, in the city of Joinville, the state of Santa Catarina, and that's it. Does the slide change it or not? Are you guys seeing the same slide or?
No, you have to move on to slide number 2. Oh, yeah. Okay, now we see slide 2.
Okay. Thanks, Thomas. Of course, following the same structure of the whole study, we've analyzed 3 newspapers, one broadsheet, one tabloid, and one regional. O Globo, I've put in parentheses the literal translation of the name in English, right? O Globo, or the Globe in English, from Rio, was the broadsheet newspaper. Meia hora, or half an hour in English, from Rio as well. The tabloid, and the regional one was Zero Hora, or in English, 0 hour, from the city of Porto Alegre. I've decided to include Zero Hora, because the city of Porto Alegre is localized in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, the southeast state. We can translate as southern big river. And the city of Porto Alegre has one of the most important football rivalries of the country, which is Grêmio versus Internacional, or Inter, the briefer name. About the number of the articles, we've analyzed in this edition of ISPS 471 texts, while in the last ISPS edition, Tatiane, the Brazilian researcher that has participated, analyzed 559. So the number of texts has decreased 15.74%. About the sections, sports, of course, has predominated, approximately 92.6%, and we found 28 productions in the front page. So this result has agreed with the tradition of Brazilian sports coverage to concentrate all the sports facts and news in the sports sections. We don't have the tradition to talk about sports, for example, in business sections or politics, and this is so interesting. About the presentation of the articles, medium-sized and leading content have predominated, and about the number of photos, the majority of the articles has followed by only one photo, as we can see in this slide, and the number of texts with no photos is expressive as well. About the format of the articles, reports have predominated, as we can see here. And this is so interesting because, in particular, I thought when I began to analyze that following the tradition of Brazilian sports press, news and commentaries would be more common than reports. But as we can see here, I was totally wrong about it. Like occurred in the last ISPS, there are more texts without, of course, explicitly mentioned name of authors than texts with named journalists. So the number of texts with female journalists alone or producing in co-authorship with male journalists corresponded to only 1.9% of the total. In the last ISPS in 2011, this percentage was 4.9%. As a consequence of that, the low number of texts written by female journalists leads us to inconclusive results about what type of sport they usually cover, female journalists, of course, as well as more details about their productions. For example, the format, the size, the number of photos, or if these productions appear in the front page or not. About the type of sports, of course, Brazilian sports media or the three analyzed newspapers covered 9 in 10 texts approximately about football or soccer to the Americans here in this section. The second most covered has been futsal, a small version of football, followed by volleyball, surfing, basketball, Formula 1, and mixed martial awards. This result is so interesting because if we look to studies which try to measure the popularity of each sport here in Brazil, we're going to see the same order: football or soccer as the most popular sport here in Brazil, futsal the second one, volleyball the third one, and surfing, basketball, Formula 1, and MMA appearing in this order. Comparing with the last ISPS, the predominance of football has increased, and the only sport that has not appeared in ISPS 2021 has been swimming. Other issues that we can stress here. Texts related to the daily coverage of the football clubs, for example, specific matches, previews, or other topics related to the performance of athletes and clubs, corresponded to approximately 93.6%. In the last ISPS, it was 74.5%. Consequently, the majority of the geographic origin of the facts has been local issues. And let me explain one thing. The main focus of the Brazilian sports press is the daily coverage of the most popular football clubs of the media city. Doesn't matter if the media is press or radio or TV or digital. Doesn't matter if national or local. For example, O Globo is localized in the city of Rio. So O Globo is going to dedicate more space to the most popular football clubs of Rio de Janeiro, while Zero Hora from Porto Alegre is going to reserve one page for Grêmio, one page for Internacional, and one or the rest of the pages available for sports sections to the other sports facts. Finally, it's important to stress that approximately 10.4% of the texts treated covered European football. I imagine that this percentage is going to be bigger in the next ISPS because the number of Brazilians that are following and even supporting European clubs has been increasing in recent years. So thank you so much for listening to me. Here you can find, you guys can access my work ID, my Twitter, if you have any question, or if you want to send a message, don't hesitate to do it. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Matheus. One terrible result was no swimming in a country with lovely beaches. I don't understand that. So we move up very soon to the next part of the world, maybe the home soil of the conference. Simon, you are presenting the results for the United States of America. So you have the time right now to give us your results, Simon.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to join us. So we should be seeing the slides that I was planning on showing today. Let's see, there we go. As is always the case, there is far more information than one can present in the, I suppose, about 10 minutes that we have allotted, but nonetheless, let's try to provide everyone with some value. And as I was listening to my colleagues and fellow researchers present, I couldn't fail to notice that on the one hand, I think we're reporting results that are valuable to the people in our own countries, but on the other hand, we're also providing value to scholars and educators and professionals from other countries and even from other continents. And so to me, it truly is interesting to observe differences between media practices around the world, if you wish. A brief methodological note: I was part of the International Sports Press Survey in 2011 as well, but at the time I examined a different country. And 5 years ago, we had 5 scholars from the US gather collecting data, or at least we have 5 scholars listed: Kim Schimmel, Teresa Walton, Jay Won Lee, Rob Hardin, and Roger Heinrich. I wasn't exactly sure who actually collected data then, so I'm just crediting everyone. But I'm also bringing this up because there is a chance, there is a possibility that they coded their data a bit differently 10 years ago. So whatever comparisons I will offer will not necessarily be directly comparable. Also, to some extent, I examined somewhat different publications. So in both years, we examined the Washington Post as a national broadsheet, as well as USA Today as the national tabloid of sorts. It's not a traditional tabloid. In terms of regional newspapers, I've analyzed, I suppose now my regional newspaper, which would be the Spokesman Review, whereas 10 years ago, the colleagues looked at the Tennessean, and this year I've also included the New York Post, which is a locally focused tabloid to the extent that we can call New York a locale, a local aspect. It's been it's been an interesting anthropological and cultural and professional exercise to study these particular publications that I'm sure American colleagues can appreciate. But let's focus on the results, or at least start reviewing some of them. So sport remains largely the domain of sports sections of newspapers, even to a slightly greater extent than 10 years ago. The most noteworthy observation that I would bring up is the decline in front page pieces, although again, this may be due to a different approach to coding. Many stories in American newspapers started on the cover page or included short snippets, which I personally coded as other, and I'm not including these results today, but I'm not entirely sure how colleagues presented them 10 years ago. So obviously results will be presented in greater detail when we write these up, and perhaps a short note on that later. In terms of genre, I think we are seeing a similar trend in the United States as Tendai noticed in South Africa, and that is a decline, a considerable decline in the news pieces. I'm guessing this is because news updates are mostly moving online now, or have moved online. We have more, again, still similarly to South Africa, if I remember correctly, we have more reports, we are seeing more commentary stories. So I think the American newspapers are starting to focus more on interpretive, slightly longer form and interpretive pieces. Though let's keep in mind that the threshold for a piece to be classified as a report or feature was relatively low. So only 2 or 3 paragraphs in length, which the American journalistic tradition tends to employ relatively short paragraphs. So we reach 3 paragraphs fairly quickly. In terms of sports in focus, top American sports continue to be baseball, basketball, even more so in 2021 than was the case 10 years ago. It is at least part of the reason is probably the inclusion of the New York Post in the analysis. So we were analyzing newspapers in the spring. The New York Post has to focus. The New York Post reports extensively on 2 baseball teams, the Yankees and the Mets. It reports extensively on 2 basketball teams, the Knicks and the Nets, not the Mets, of course. All were regularly and all were rather conspicuously covered by the New York Post, as, you know, for what it's worth, as to some extent is expected by tabloid publications. Football, as in American football, gridiron football, ranks comparatively low, but, you know, let's keep in mind, so only 13.4% of articles focused on football, but let's keep in mind that data was gathered in April through July. So to put things into perspective, football, NFL football, deeply in the off season, still attracts more coverage than in season NHL hockey. It attracted 6 times more coverage, greater coverage than track and field in an Olympic year. To put the dominance of the sport in context. Tennis and golf are covered less. Coverage is emerging, or coverage has emerged for some new sports that were not captured in 2011. So again, some interesting signs there, some diversification there. Interesting, we saw even more game coverage than 10 years ago, but other than that, other content has diversified, which can be shown by the still relatively low, but still considerably higher shares that were, I guess, found when it comes to coverage of sport financing, media aspects of sport, and then even more importantly, children's and youth sport for our American members of the audience here. Despite the efforts of the NCAA to persuade us that college sports are amateur sports, I took the liberty of not counting NCAA sports as amateur after all. But children's and youth sports would include, for example, high school sports that are covered in some publications. And then there was some coverage of gender issues in sport. Also, these pertain to stories about sexual abuse, which have been a thing for the past few years, for example, in American media. Less coverage of sports politics, not entirely sure what prompted that. In terms of authors of articles, we saw an increase in pieces without a byline. Note, this may be again due to the selection of publications. The New York Post, for example, they will publish several stories all on the same page. Not all of them are necessarily bylined, but it could be implied there. It can be implied they're written by the same authors, but we don't know that for sure. I think something that is more interesting is the gender of authors, and contrary to a trend observed in some other countries, we did see a decrease in pieces authored by male writers, which I think is a good development. Let me mute Matthew for a second. There we go. So there is the gender of authors. Female are appearing more, which I think is positive. Oh, let me go back a slide just for a quick second. So yes, over here, this slide only shows the articles that actually included a byline. And again, we can see that the share of articles written by women has almost doubled from 6.6% to 11.6%. So it's some progress, I would say. Obviously, there is still a long way to go to achieve equality, but at least the newspapers in the United States seem to be trending in the right direction. Could more have been achieved in the past 10 years? Probably yes. Should the gap be narrower? Probably yes. But again, it's at least it's a trend. When looking at where do women publish, about 1 in 4 articles published by the Washington Post is now written by women. About 10% of articles published in the local newspaper, in New York Post, in USA Today, were written by women. So I suppose we could consider this as a sort of a baseline, contemporary baseline in American coverage. If you see less than 1 in 10 pieces written by women in the United States, then you're really in trouble, I suppose. When women write, they write about ice hockey, but this is probably heavily skewed by one single author, Molly Walker, by one single writer who covers the New York Rangers for the New York Post. So as I wrote here, what a difference one single person can make. But again, we will focus more on deeper results will be presented on some other occasion. What topic women write about? Some greater variety than 10 years ago, but they still focused mostly on results and reports. Again, probably still the impact or the influence of Molly Walker writing for the New York Post. And I will try to wrap this up soon, so hang in there with me, please. But gender focus of articles. What do the articles themselves write about? The share of articles about women's sports has also increased, not quite doubled, from 6.4% 10 years ago to 11.2%. So 1 in 10 articles in American newspapers is about women's sports, mostly about basketball. A lot of them about the WNBA professional league, also quite a bit of coverage attracted by the women's March Madness, and then well, women's sports anyway, women's college sports anyway. Tennis considerably less prominent than was the case 10 years ago. Let me skip the sources and the photos because they're not that terribly interesting, but I can come back to these results in our discussion part if needed. If I try to summarize my findings in 30 seconds, it is a bit difficult to directly compare results from 10 years ago than today, different coder, different outlets. Overall, I think we are seeing in the United States a move towards more interpretive, longer form and a more interpretive writing in newspapers, which makes sense. News have now mostly moved online. similar distribution of sports, somewhat greater content variety, which I think is positive. I haven't had the chance to do a statistical analysis quite yet. Hang in there, I'm saving this for the written piece, of course. Some interesting observations pertaining to gender, which I tried to summarize. And in terms of dissemination plans, I think these results will be interesting to, on the one hand, put them into a context and compare them to other countries. On the other hand, I think it will also be interesting to prepare a separate piece focused specifically on the United States. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions we might have, but let me wrap this up here and open the floor for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the US results. And we will have time just a minute for some results from Australia. I move over to my colleague, Christof. He will present us the summary of the results from Peter English, Australia. We have to excuse him. Australia is very close, it's very deep in the night right now, and he's sleeping. So, Christof, just 1 minute for the summary of the results of Australia.
You are muted, as it often happens.
Okay, now that makes sense. Thank you, Simon. Well, thank you very much, Thomas. Peter provided us with a wonderful audio presentation. So Thomas, probably if you will send the recorded session, you can entirely add this. But anyhow, I would like to tell you something about to complete the entire picture. A couple facts we received from Australia. They coded 1,100 articles. This year, almost the same number than 10 years ago. What we've seen that a lot of reports and features have been covered by the newspaper. This is also something we can see in Australia. Of course, we have different main sports, not soccer like in Europe, but in Australia, we have a lot of Australian football, of course, rugby, the different forms of rugby. And what surprises me actually was the equestrian sport, which was placed 2 or 3 on the ranking. And it is quite similar to what we have seen in the rest of the world, that the males still dominate the sports coverage, except the US. They've been doing a great job, but in Australia also the male reporters are writing more about sports than the female do. And well, as you can see here, in the past 10 years, it's still a small number of female reporters. Anyhow, we see that it's kind of a quality increasing by bigger pieces, more pictures, less no author stories. And so this just will round and sum up the entire picture of all the continents we've covered. Thank you so much. Now I will give back to Thomas to start the discussion.
Thank you, all my colleagues from all over the world. We do have time for some minutes of questions and discussions. And I have one question online in the chat from Roxanne. Please ask your question.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for great presentations. I was wondering how much you think COVID might have affected your results. And I'm not thinking necessarily only about women's sports coverage, but also there have been, at least in the US, there have been some reports about how women have taken kind of the bulk of extra housework and childcare with schools being closed and whatnot. And so they were not necessarily as available to actually work in their professional careers. And so how much, you think COVID might have affected also the results in terms of female versus male authors in each country? And maybe you don't know, maybe it's too speculative, but in case you have any insight about it.
So my colleagues, is everyone going to answer this question? Simon?
I will start and I will try to keep it brief. Mind blown, haven't thought of this. Interesting perspective. I think a sort of a possible proxy would be to try and figure out how the names of the authors last year compared to the names of the authors, I don't know, either today or 3 years ago or whenever a good period might be. But the short answer is I haven't thought of it. Thank you for bringing up the idea. And I haven't spoken to anyone either. So it's an interesting idea that I have not considered. Thank you.
So let me answer from the perspective of methodology. We thought about what will we do with this pandemic. The IASPS 2021 was organized a long time before this pandemic started, and so we keep on running the data collecting even if the pandemic is going on. And for the European newspapers, I can say the sport was with all the football teams and all the football leagues are keep on running after a short time out of even I think 2 months. So they played, and the style of sports reporting and print media doesn't change a lot due to the pandemic and Corona. So because of these still running football leagues, and you can see in most of the countries, football is the main media sport, even in countries like China or very strong in Brazil and in South Africa. So it looks like a little bit soccer is still dominating the media world and print media, and due to this running system of football leagues, there is not a very big change. But we have to take a very close look into the content, and I think we see some health-related reporting in print media in all countries raised a little bit. So increasing stories like health coverage, what kind of protection against the virus, what kind of impact of the virus on training and other leagues. So this might be some reasons, but we decided to move on with this international sports press survey in a slightly smaller version than 10 years ago due to the pandemic. Christof.
Thomas, I would like to add something, because we afterwards we had a research on why do female journalists do not cover sports. And we asked, well, younger people and CEOs or editors-in-chief, and this has nothing to do with the pandemic. There is something about the acceptance of female authors covering sports. And I don't think that there is a big COVID effect on this. This is a bigger problem or a bigger thing that the female journalists do not find the way to sports. Even here in Germany, we had the results that it's even easier to cover national sports events than to go on a playing field on a countryside where it's male dominated by the spectators, and you are there as a female journalist. This is a big question, but I don't think that this is that there's a big COVID effect of this.
Okay, I've seen one raised hand. Norman Bowley.
Hi, everyone. Glad to see you all here. I really enjoyed this panel. I have a quick question about these results from 2021, right? So, because last year we have the Olympic Games. So do you think because of the Olympic Games that really impact the result? Because I think females coverage definitely increased because Olympic Games, people watch a lot of like females competition compared to male athletes. And also because of Olympic Games, sports coverage is definitely increased compared to other years. Thanks.
So let me just answer again from the methodology standpoint. This was the second thing we have to decide, because when we started data collecting, we thought of Olympic Games in 2020, and we want to do data collecting in 2021 because it was planned as a year without a big sport event like Olympic Games or football championships, European or World Championships. It moved on to a year with European Championships in football and Olympic Games. So we decided to let everything go, and we analyzed the entire data from the world for both of these big sports events. And we can see from the world data, we can see what we called an European football, European Championships effect, because we do see that the European Championships have a big effect on the data, because there's more football related to the European Championships based in not only in Europe, but also in countries like South Africa and Brazil, because many players from Africa and South America are playing in the European leagues. So we do see an effect of the European Championships, but we can't see really an effect of the Olympic Games. It might be the Olympic Games were later on in the year. They were determined in September, and the football championships was in June, July. So we do see an effect of the football European Championships, but not as big as the Olympic Games. I hope I do a right explanation, or did I anything wrong, colleagues?
Tendai, why don't you go ahead, and then I will briefly, in like 30 seconds, try to respond to both questions. Tendai, go ahead.
Tendai.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've got a question directed at Matheus. I would like to find out why. Do you know why the number of stories declined from 2011 to 2021? We see that there was a decline in the number of stories on sports. Do you have an idea? Thank you.
I'm not sure about it. Maybe in recent years we're seeing the really decreasing of quality about sports press here in Brazil. Radio, TV, and digital are dominating this segment. So this maybe can explain why we've found these results about the number of the articles, or even the big number of no signed texts, or even text without photos and something like that. Nowadays, Brazilian sports press is just a few pages, the sports sections, I mean, a few pages about the most important football clubs, and brief text about other stuff, like, for example, Formula One, or futsal, or other sports that has a minimum number of public, or of audience, I mean.
Thanks a lot. Simon, you want to answer?
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And again, I'll try to keep this brief. I've also posted this in the chat. I was actually surprised by how few stories in American newspapers focused on the impending Olympics. So let's keep in mind, however, that our last collection date was early July, and I don't remember if it was July 1st, July 2nd, something like that. So a few weeks before the Summer Olympics began. I would say the following, or I guess my take on this, my interpretation is, at least in the United States, newspapers clearly focus on very contemporary stories on the news of the day. And when it came, another thing worth keeping in mind is stories about the Olympics, I think, would be either coded as, so they were probably coded as non-gender specific. They either pertained to both genders or no gender in focus if we were just talking about the politics of the Olympic Games, the Olympic Games and the pandemic and so on and so forth. So that may not have quite come through in these numbers. But again, as far as I'm concerned, very interesting comment. Thank you for bringing this up.
Thank you. I don't see another raised hand, and we are 3 or 5 minutes over time. So I want to give you a chance for a short breakfast coffee, and for us, give us chance for dinner or something else. And let me just summarize that I hope it was interesting to see the results of different nations all over the world from the International Sports Press Survey. Most of the results are very, very similar, like bigger stories, more stories, and more sources for the stories, more photos, and most of the time even more sources, at least one source for every article. And we can see football is something like the main media sport in all continents of the world right now, followed by different national contexts like rugby and futsal in Brazil or South America. And most of all, we see this very, very big gender issue in print media reporting, the same issue than 10 years before. So most of the time, decreasing number of female sports journalists, and they are covering different sports. So this is quite interesting. And I think we will keep up following and keep an eye on this. And so thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for IACS to give us the chance for this virtual session, because it's a big chance for us to bring up the results of this survey to the world. And we are unfortunately not able to come over to Philly or to Rowan University this time. Thanks very much. And colleagues, good job. And I hope you will have a very good conference. I will keep on following the next session. Thank you. Bye.